4 core players, 3 max contract slots, one decision that will define whether the Indiana Fever waste Caitlin Clark's prime or build a dynasty. The Fever just extended a core qualifying offer to Kelsey Mitchell and a restricted qualifying offer to Lexi Hall. On the surface, this looks like a franchise protecting its assets, but here's what nobody's saying out loud. The math doesn't work. Someone's getting left out. And the choice Indiana makes in the next few weeks will either position them as championship contenders or reveal them as an organization that fundamentally misunderstands how to build around generational talent. Let's break down the nightmare scenario that's keeping Fever executives up at night. Under the new CBA, each team has salary cap space for 2 max contracts or 1 max contract and 1 supermax contract. Kelsey Mitchell qualifies for a supermax. Aaliyah Boston qualifies for a max. And here's the problem that changes everything. Next year, Caitlin Clark becomes supermax eligible. That's 3 players competing for 2 financial slots. The structure of the league literally will not allow all 3 to stay at their market value. Something has to give. And what gives will tell you everything about whether this front office knows what it's doing. Indiana could offer Mitchell a 1-year supermax and kick this decision down the road. Run it back with last year's core. Try to win now. Deal with the Caitlin situation in 2026 when it becomes unavoidable. But here's the risk with that approach. What if another team swoops in during next year's free agency with a multi-year supermax offer, giving Mitchell the job security Indiana can't provide? That's the leverage play everyone around the league is watching for. Because Mitchell's not stupid. She knows the math. She knows that if Clark gets priority, her window in Indiana is closing. So why wouldn't she take a longer deal somewhere else if it's available? And then there's the other option, the one that should terrify Fever fans who care more about nostalgia than winning. Indiana could give Mitchell a multi-year supermax right now. Lock her in for 3 years at approximately $600,000 annually. And in doing so, immediately block themselves from offering Caitlin Clark a supermax when she becomes eligible in 2026. They'd have Mitchell and Boston locked into max-level money, leaving Clark as the 3rd option financially despite being the franchise cornerstone, despite being the reason attendance doubled, despite being the most transformational player this league has ever seen. That's not just bad business. That's organizational malpractice. And the terrifying part is that this possibility exists because Indiana's front office hasn't publicly declared who their franchise player is. They haven't drawn that line in the sand. Compare that to Las Vegas. The Aces didn't hesitate. They built everything around A'ja Wilson. They made it crystal clear through their contract offers, their roster construction, their entire organizational philosophy that Wilson is untouchable and everyone else is negotiable. That clarity creates stability. Players know where they stand. Agents know what's available. There's no ambiguity about who the franchise is being built around. Indiana hasn't done that. They haven't said the quiet part out loud, which is that Caitlin Clark is the franchise and everyone else's contract needs to fit around that reality. And that silence creates exactly the kind of uncertainty that leads to bad decisions made under pressure. Because when you haven't established a hierarchy, when you haven't made it clear who the foundation is, you end up in situations where you're trying to please everyone and you end up building a roster that makes nobody happy. Rachel, one of the analysts breaking this story down, admitted something brutally honest. She said, "I don't really understand this front office. There have been a lot of decisions that they've made, even in players that they signed last year, that I didn't truly understand. And that's not just criticism, that's pattern recognition. Look at last season's signings." Indiana brought in players who didn't fit the system, didn't address their defensive weaknesses, and created roster redundancies that limited their playoff rotation. Those weren't minor mistakes. Those were fundamental misreads of what this team needed. So when Rachel says she wouldn't be surprised if they give Mitchell a multi-year supermax, that's not speculation. That's her recognizing a pattern. This front office has consistently prioritized short-term roster continuity over long-term strategic planning. They've shown they'll overpay for familiarity rather than make the harder choice that positions them for sustained success. And if they do that with Mitchell, if they choose present comfort over future flexibility, they'll spend the next decade regretting it. Now there's a third option that nobody wants to talk about because it feels cold, but it's the option smart organizations consider. Trade Kelsey Mitchell. She's a valuable asset, a proven scorer, an all-WNBA player. Teams would absolutely give up assets to acquire her. And if Indiana believes that building the best possible team around Caitlin Clark is the priority, then moving Mitchell for multiple pieces that better fit Clark's timeline and style of play is a legitimate strategic option. It's ruthless. It'll piss off fans who love Mitchell, but ruthless strategic thinking is what separates championship organizations from ones that waste generational talent. And here's the thing, it seems like Indiana's probably not going to do that. The most likely scenario, and this is just reading the tea leaves based on their history, is that they give Mitchell a one-year supermax and then figure it out later. Run it back, try to win this season, delay the hard decision for another year, and maybe that works. Maybe they win a championship this year and the whole problem resolves itself. But what if they don't? What if they run it back and get bounced in the second round again? Then you're in the exact same position next year, except Mitchell has even more leverage, because now you've established that you're not willing to let her walk. But let's talk about the other name on this list. Lexi Hall just got a restricted qualifying offer. That means Indiana has the right to match any offer she receives from another team. And this is where things get interesting, because the restricted offer doesn't guarantee Hall comes back. It just gives the Fever control over the negotiation. If another team comes in with a big offer, Indiana has to decide if matching it fits within their cap structure and their long-term plan. And if it doesn't, Hall could be gone. And that would hurt. Hall's not a star, but she's exactly the kind of role player championship teams need. She spaces the floor, plays within the system, doesn't need the ball in her hands, and fits seamlessly next to Clark and Boston. Losing her because you can't afford to match an offer from another team while you're paying Mitchell's supermax money would be a perfect example of how prioritizing the wrong player screws up your entire roster construction. Oh, let's talk about who Indiana should be targeting in free agency, because this is where smart front offices separate themselves. Alana Smith just told Minnesota she's exploring other opportunities. That's not posturing. That's a veteran, all-defensive caliber player signaling she's available. Smith averaged 9 points and 6 rebounds last season, shot 37% from three, and brings exactly the versatile defensive presence Indiana desperately needs. Here's why she fits. Caitlin Clark's offensive system requires shooters who can space the floor and defenders who can switch multiple positions. Smith does both. She's not a max player, which means she's affordable within their cap structure. And she's 28 years old, right in her prime, matching the Fever's championship window perfectly. Then there's Julie Vanloo. She's a pass-first point guard who shot 39% from three last season with Washington. She'd give Indiana exactly what they lacked all year. A secondary playmaker who can run the offense when Clark sits and play off-ball when they're together. And here's the thing, Vanloo liked an Instagram post about potentially joining the Fever. That might seem like nothing, but in the WNBA's tight-knit community, these digital breadcrumbs matter. Players talk. Agents communicate. When a veteran guard likes a post about potentially joining your team, that's not random, that's interest. And it's not just Vanloo. Azura Stevens reposted herself in a Fever jersey. Multiple veterans are exploring options that include Indianapolis, and this is the part that people keep missing. The destination argument is dead. Players want to be in Indiana now. They see the sold-out crowds. They see the national attention. They see the chance to play with the most dynamic offensive player the league has ever seen. Indiana's problem isn't attracting talent. It's choosing the right talent and paying them appropriately. Because here's what this entire free agency period comes down to. The first contract Indiana signs tells you everything about their organizational philosophy. If they give Kelsey Mitchell a multi-year supermax, they're choosing present comfort over future flexibility. They're betting that running it back with last year's core is worth limiting their options when Caitlin becomes supermax eligible. If they sign Mitchell to a one-year deal, they're acknowledging the inevitable. They're buying time to figure out the long-term structure while keeping their championship window open. But if they let Mitchell walk and use that money on multiple pieces like Smith and Vanloo, if they bring in defenders and shooters and secondary playmakers, who fit Clark's system, then they're making the ruthless calculation that building the best team around Clark matters more than loyalty to existing players. And that's the decision championship organizations make. They prioritize fit over familiarity. They build around their franchise player, even when it means making moves that upset fans in the short term. Watch that first signing. Watch the contract length and the money, because that decision reveals whether Indiana's front office learned anything from last season's mistakes or whether they're about to repeat them on a larger scale. The core qualifying offers went out yesterday. Mitchell got called, Hall got a restricted offer. Those are procedural moves. The real decisions start now, and every team in the league is watching. Because how Indiana handles this offseason doesn't just affect the Fever, it sets the market for every other team navigating these new CBA complications. Kelsey Plum got caught by the Sparks, Nafisa Collier by the Lynx, Sabrina Ionescu by the Liberty, Alyssa Thomas by the Sun. These are franchise players getting tagged because their teams can't afford to lose them for nothing. But coring someone doesn't mean keeping them. It means controlling their negotiation. Indiana could core Mitchell, sign her, and trade her for assets. They could core her and let another team make an offer they choose not to match. The core designation is leverage, not commitment. And that's what makes the next 2 weeks fascinating. We're about to see which front offices understand the difference between keeping players and building championship rosters. We're about to see who's willing to make the hard choice that pisses off fans in the short term, but positions them for sustained success. Indiana's got everything in place. They've got the most valuable asset in the league in Caitlin Clark. They've got a young core with legitimate potential in Boston and Hall. They've got cap space. They've got a fan base that's proven they'll show up. Everything's there except the one thing that matters most. A front office willing to make ruthless strategic decisions based on long-term vision rather than short-term comfort. The Kelsey Mitchell decision is the test. How they handle it tells you whether this team's going to compete for championships or waste the most transformational player the league's ever seen. Because here's the reality. Caitlin's Supermax eligibility is coming whether Indiana's ready or not. And if they've already committed that money elsewhere because they couldn't make the hard choice now, they'll spend the next decade regretting it. So here's my question. If you're running the Fever, what's your move? Do you give Mitchell the multi-year Supermax and figure out Caitlin later? Do you run it back on a one-year deal and delay the inevitable? Or do you let Mitchell walk and rebuild the roster around Clark with multiple impact pieces like Smith and Vanloo? Because there's no perfect answer here, but there are definitely wrong ones. And we're about to find out if Indiana's front office knows the difference.